I'll now turn to Michael Kugelman, who will provide us some perspective on the international dimensions of the way forward for Bangladesh. So over to you, Michael.
Yeah, thank you, John, and thank you to Ambassador Milam and to Mushfiq and others at Right to Freedom. Thank you for including me in this very important discussion. Um, Foreign policy will not, I don't think, it will not be the uppermost priority for the interim government in the next few weeks. The biggest priorities will be issues of law and order, economic stabilization, and reform, among other things. That's not to say that there are not urgent foreign policy priorities right now. There are, and in particular, the relationship with India, which I'll talk about in a bit, especially because of the fact that Sheikh Hasina is still in India more than 4 weeks after she was ousted, or almost 4 weeks. And also the situation in Myanmar, the war there, as I think we all know, has really intensified in a big way in recent months, and we're starting to see growing spillover effects in Bangladesh. So I think that's an urgent priority as well, or should be. But be this all as it may, I think it's very important to talk about how the interim government in Bangladesh should approach its international relations. My first point here is that the government, as I see it, has both advantages and disadvantages as it approaches its foreign policy. In terms of the advantages, what it has in its favor, the Yunus factor, I think, is something that we really need to underscore here. He is a star abroad. He's a household name. He's deeply respected, and he really will not have to work very hard at all to get the world's attention or the world's respect. Also, Bangladesh is a significant global economic player, and as a non-aligned state, a geostrategically important country in an era of great power competition. And this means that much of the world will want to engage with the interim government. Now, what the interim government does not have in its favor, disadvantages with foreign policy, or should I say challenges, there really is very little experience with governance within this interim government, and that includes Dr. Yunus himself. And the interim government advisor charged with foreign policy, he's a retired diplomat. He's a respected retired diplomat, but he is, at the end of the day, a retired diplomat. Also, the fact that you still have a significant degree of political uncertainty in Bangladesh right now, this is something that has made and will continue to make a number of world leaders and capitals a bit nervous. And also the law and order situation, which may be more stable now than it was several weeks ago, but remains tenuous. This is something that will have impacts on global investors, among others, in terms of how they perceive Bangladesh right now. So, with that said, what should the interim government do on foreign policy in the coming weeks and the coming months? Uh, Above all, I think it would be very useful to reach out to and reassert the importance of its ties with Bangladesh's ties with its wide range of commercial economic partners. Bangladesh is a country that has a significant role in the global economy, so it has a very wide range of partners across the board. This includes sponsors of infrastructure projects in Bangladesh, like China and Japan. It includes key trade partners like the EU and, of course, the US. And it includes energy suppliers in the Middle East, among other things. And I think that this is especially important diplomatic outreach now, given that the economic situation in Bangladesh is quite precarious. So I think it's essential to ensure that relations with Bangladesh's economic partners remain robust. But these partners do have some concerns now. Um, Bangladesh, for example, I think will need to show in very concrete ways that it is taking the right steps on restoring law and order and security. And that appears to be going well for the most part, but there clearly are still a number of challenges remaining on that front. I also think that when it comes to Dhaka's interlocutors in the West, it is very important to underscore Bangladesh's commitment to rights and democracy. Bangladesh has many important trade partners in the West. It will not want to let concerns about rights and democracy deleteriously impact its relations with the West, as was the case during the Hasina era. Dr. Yunus, with his reputation in the West as a fervent supporter of democracy, I think can be an asset in this regard. But Bangladesh's government, I think will really need to walk the talk, so to speak, and show that it is truly committed to restoring democracy and human rights. And speaking of Dr. Yunus, he will have a big opportunity very soon in the next few weeks at the UNGA meetings, which I understand he will be attending, or he likely will attend. And if he does, he would be speaking in New York on the biggest global platform since he took over the role of advisor leading the interim government. So, assuming he's there in New York speaking at the UNGA, what should he do? What should he say? There's several things that he could do, several things that he could say. I think that above all, he should lay out a vision for governance, the goals of the interim government, his plans for reforms, his efforts to push for the restoration of democracy, and so on and so forth. I think it would also be very useful for him to speak about his government's economic plans and including what areas specifically the international community can be helpful in strengthening, stabilizing Bangladesh's economy. And I also think that you know his platform at the UNGA would give him an opportunity to weigh in on what is arguably Bangladesh's biggest humanitarian challenge, and that being the Rohingya refugee issue. I think that it would be useful for him to make a pitch for international assistance or more international assistance for Rohingya refugees, it would be an especially important pitch for two reasons. One, as I noted before, the war in Myanmar is intensifying in a big way, and we've seen in recent weeks fresh inflows of Rohingya refugees coming into Bangladesh. Second reason why this would be an important pitch to make is that donor attention, international donor attention, has been drawn elsewhere due to the wars in Gaza and Ukraine, among other places. And so I think there is a risk that the Rohingya crisis, which has received significant levels of international attention and donor support in recent years, but there still is a risk that it could be overlooked. So I think that at the UNGA there would be a really good opportunity for Dr. Yunus to reorient attention around that challenge. And I'll start to wrap up with a few words about India. I think we have to talk about India in any conversation about what Bangladesh's foreign policy approach would be. It's perhaps Bangladesh's most complex foreign relationship right now. It's one of the only countries, and certainly its only close friend, that has not rushed to embrace or at least welcome the new government. There had been a brief engagement, a call, I believe, between Dr. Yunus and Narendra Modi. But that's pretty much it. And as I understand it, not much really was said in that call. Bangladesh, I think, has an opportunity to assert, or should I say, reassert its agency vis-a-vis India. What do I mean by that? Well, it has there's a fresh slate at play here. And it can commit to not letting India influence its foreign policy decisions. It can commit to not letting India undermine its strategic autonomy. It can commit to not letting the independence of its foreign policy or its domestic policies, for that matter, be undermined by India. But I think that we need to be very clear, at least in my view, is that Bangladesh cannot afford to lose India, so to speak. It needs that partnership for reasons of trade, for reasons of border security, for reasons of geopolitics. I think it really needs to maintain workable relations with India, not necessarily super warm relations, but workable relations. Just like, quite frankly, I think India's own interests dictate a workable relationship with Bangladesh moving forward in this post-Hasina era. And in that regard, I would make three suggestions to the interim government. First, do engage with New Delhi, or at least try. Dr. Yunus will likely have an opportunity to meet with Modi during the UNGA meetings, assuming they're both there, and I assume they both will be there. He should avail of that opportunity. Second, there are some steps that Dhaka can take that would advance its own interests, particularly its security interests, but would also address some of India's concerns. And these steps can include Dr. Yunus and others in the interim government meeting regularly with leaders of religious minority communities in Bangladesh to ensure that concerns about security are being addressed. And in fact, these meetings have already been happening. Dr. Yunus has met with leaders of the Hindu community, for example. These steps could also include easing up on destabilizing retributive politics that target peaceful, innocent Bangladeshis that happen to have been supporters of the Awami League, of the previous Awami League-led government. Third, Maybe don't unthinkingly succumb to the temptations of populism. There is, as we all know, extensive levels of anti-India sentiment in Bangladesh. One can understand why. Um, that very recently, again, as we all know, recently fueled speculation that India opened up a dam that helped precipitate the recent floods in Bangladesh. And Nahid Islam, one of the top student protest leaders and now a member of the interim government, holding minister status or the equivalent of it, he repeated those allegations, even though there's no indications that that actually is true. But because of that anti-India sentiment among the public in Bangladesh, this interim government will need to be very careful about how it pursues its relations with New Delhi. I mean, it's going to need to take care not to do anything that could further inflame that anti-India sentiment. And this is why I think it should combine its outreach to India with a principled stand against any attempts by India to meddle or try to meddle or exert outsized influence. To conclude, final word, I would observe that Bangladesh's domestic situation and its domestic policy priorities are very much linked to its foreign policy right now. I mentioned earlier how the law and order situation and political uncertainty in Bangladesh could impact the perceptions and potentially the actions of foreign governments and foreign investors vis-a-vis Bangladesh. Even something as seemingly distinct as labor rights in Bangladesh has direct tie-ins to its diplomatic relations and broader foreign policy. Because of Bangladesh's poor labor rights situation, it misses out on a major investment opportunity coming from the US. And that's because the US International Development Finance Corporation, the DFC, the main US government sponsor of infrastructure assistance in the Indo-Pacific, is not allowed, it's not authorized to invest in Bangladesh because of its labor rights situation. Strengthening its labor rights can bolster its prospects for more investment from the US and from Europe as well. So with that, I'll end there and back to you, John. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Michael. That was a fantastic overview of the international dimension of Bangladesh interim government's way forward.